Happy Friday, World History students. Sorry I'm missing you today, but I'm sure you're in good hands. Please follow these directions. Hopefully you did a good solid job of responding to the prompt because like I said, that is a benchmark assignment. I am going to be looking carefully at your 3 pieces of evidence. So if that's panicking you right now, go back and look and ask yourself, what sort of expectations would she have of me? And did I meet them? So first of all, yesterday we left off with Octavian, aka Augustus, who's right here on the right, looking pretty studly here, taking over as the first emperor, exalted one, Augustus of Rome. A little bit about Augustus. First of all, he was born in 63 BC and he will die in 14 AD or CE Common Era. Augustus was the most powerful ruler of the mightiest empire of the ancient world. But amid all the pomp of Rome, he was actually a pretty simple and frugal guy. His home was pretty modest by Roman standards, and his favorite meal consisted of bread, sardines, and a piece of cheese, which was pretty typical, like common labor type of food. Augustus was very religious, very family-oriented, and he had a really strict moral code, which he held himself to, but he also held his own children to. For example, he had a child named Julia, just like Julius Caesar, and he actually exiled her from Rome for not being faithful to her husband in her marriage. So Rome, a vast and powerful empire, Rome was at its peak of its power from the beginning of Augustus's rule in 27 BC to about 180 AD, and so that's about 207 years. Pax Romana means Roman peace. Pax is peace. And peace reigned throughout the empire except for a little bit of fighting with tribes along the outside borders. The period of peace and prosperity, known as Pax Romana, included a Roman Empire that included more than 3 million square miles. Its population numbered between 60 and 80 million people, and 1 million of those people lived inside of the city of Rome itself. The Romans held their vast empire together in part through efficient government and able rulers. Augustus was one of the most able, and he stabilized the frontier and glorified Rome with all kinds of splendid buildings, created a system of government that survived for centuries. He set up a civil service, that is, he paid workers to manage the affairs of the government, such as grain supply, tax collection, and postal systems. And while the Senate still functioned, civil servants drawn from plebs and even former slaves actually administered most of the empire. It's kind of cool. After Augustus died in 14 AD or CE, the system of government that he established maintained the empire's stability, which is really tough to do. This was due mainly to the effectiveness of the civil service in carrying out the day-to-day operations. The Romans managed to control an empire that by the 2nd century AD reached from Spain to Mesopotamia, from North Africa to Britain, and included in its provinces were people of many languages, many cultures, and many customs. After Caesar Augustus, there's going to be a little bit of a bleak spot as the emperors grew weird. So Caesar Augustus is here on the right, and he's a woohoo! Oh yeah, he was a good guy. Shortly after Caesar Augustus, though, and thankfully the Roman Empire is going to be in pretty good shape, and it can withstand a few of these people. But this is Tiberius. Tiberius is the guy that took people out to the island. I told you about that the other day. Took these people out to an island and pretty much didn't do much in Rome at all, but Rome was kind of on autopilot thanks to Augustus. He had his little pleasure palace out in the island, and he took advantage of all kinds of people out there, including his own nephew Caligula, who, some people think, smothered him at the end of his life because he was sick and tired of being manipulated and exploited by his own uncle. That left Caligula in charge, and Caligula was crazy in all sorts of ways. Probably next week we'll play a Caligula True or False game that I made about all the weird things. I mean, Caligula, he did some weird things. He was really an odd duck. You already know some of them, like kind of sleeping with his sisters, some people think, having a house of prostitutes, I'm right at the palace, rolling around in gold and dressing himself up like his little stone friend, and anyway, all kinds of stuff. Caligula was followed by Claudius, who you saw. Look at the face of Claudius. You can kind of tell when you look at those facial features, something's not quite right. something's like getting off at this point. He was the one you saw in the video clip that stammered, and he foamed at the mouth, he stumbled around, he had physical deformities, he just didn't have gravitas. If you remember, we talked about gravitas, just a presence about you. He did not have a presence. And if it was a presence, it was like, please don't spit on me, dude. I don't want to eat my grapes by you. He also had really bad luck in marriage. Tried 3 times, failed every time. His own son died throwing up a piece of fruit and catching it in the air. It's really sad stuff. Nero's also crazy, and you can see that, now look at that chin, now look at the subset of the chin. Something's not right. And at what point in history is that beard cool? It's just not. Guys, if that ever strikes you to do that, no. Look around, ask any girl near you. Don't do it. Okay. Glad we got that straight. Agriculture and trade. Agriculture was the most important industry in the empire. All else depended upon it. As you guys already know, about 90% of the people were engaged in farming. Most Romans survived on the produce from their own local area, additional food when it was needed, and luxury items from the rich when it was obtained through trade. In Augustus's time, a silver coin called a denarius was in use throughout the empire. Having common coinage made trade with different parts of the empire much, much easier. Rome had a really vast trading network, as you guys already can imagine. Ships from the east traveled the Mediterranean, protected by the Roman navy. Cities such as Corinth in Greece and Ephesus in Anatolia and Antioch in the eastern parts of the Mediterranean grew really wealthy. Rome was trading with China and India at the time. A complex network of roads, which you've already learned plenty about, linked the empire to such far-flung places as Persia and southern Russia. The roads were originally built by the Roman army for military purposes, but had huge consequences for trade. The Roman world. Throughout its history, the Roman world emphasized the values of discipline and strength and loyalty. As we already talked about, a person with these qualities is said to have the important virtue of gravitas. The Romans were a really practical people. They honored strength more than beauty, power more than grace, usefulness more than elegance. And most people in the Roman Empire lived in the countryside and worked on farms. In Rome and smaller cities, merchants, soldiers, slaves, foreigners, and philosophers all shared the crowded, noisy streets. Here people from all walks of life came together to create a pretty diverse society. Slaves in captivity. Slavery was a really significant part of Roman life. It was widespread and really important to the economy. Romans made more use of slaves than any previous civilization. Numbers of slaves may have reached as high as 1/3 of the population. Most slaves were conquered people brought back by victorious Roman armies and included men and women and children. Children born to slaves also became slaves. Slaves could be bought and sold. According to Roman law, slaves were the property of their owners. They could be punished, rewarded, set free, or put to death as the master saw fit. Slaves worked both in the city and on the farm. Many were treated cruelly and worked at hard labor all day long, but some, strong, healthy males, were forced to become gladiators or professional fighters who fought to the death in public contests. Other slaves, particularly those who worked in wealthy households, were better treated. Occasionally slaves would rebel, as you saw in the movie with Apollonius. None of these slave revolts really succeeded, though. More than 1 million slaves lost their lives attempting to gain their own freedom. Gods and goddesses. The earliest Romans worshipped powerful spirits or divine forces called noumena, that they thought resided in just about everything around them. Closely related to the spirits were the Lares, who were guardian spirits of each family. They gave names to these powerful gods and goddesses and honored them through various rituals, hoping to gain favor and avoid misfortune. In Rome, government and religion were linked. The deities were symbols of the state. Romans were expected to honor them not only in private rituals at shrines inside of their own homes, but also in public worship ceremonies conducted by priests in temples. Among the most common and the most important Roman gods and goddesses were Jupiter, father of the gods, Zeus, Juno, his wife, Hera, who supposedly watched over women, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom, that would be Athena, and the arts and crafts. During the empire, worship of the emperor also became part of the official religion of Rome. By the time of the empire, Wealth and social status made huge differences in the way that people lived. Classes had little in common. The rich lived really extravagantly. They spent large sums of money on homes and gardens and slaves and other luxuries. They gave banquets that lasted hours, included foods that were rare and costly, like boiled ostrich and parrot tongue pie. However, most people in Rome barely had the necessities of life, and during this time of the empire, much of the city's population was actually unemployed. The government supported these people with daily rations of grain. In the shadow of Rome's great temples and public buildings, poor people crowded into rickety, sprawling tenements, and fire was always a constant danger. To distract and control the masses of Rome, the government provided free games, races, mock battles, gladiator contests. By 250 AD, there were 150 holidays in a given calendar year, and on these days of celebration, the Colosseum, a huge arena that would hold up to 50,000 people, would fill with the rich and poor alike. The spectacles that they watched combined bravery and cruelty, honor and violence. In the animal shows, wild creatures brought from distant lands, such as tigers and lions and bears, fought to the death. In other contests, gladiators engaged in combat with animals or with each other until one of them was killed. During this time of Pax Romana, another activity slowly emerged in the Roman Empire, the practice of a new religion known as Christianity. The early followers of this new faith would meet with much brutality and hardship for their beliefs at first, but their religion would endure and spread throughout the empire and eventually become one of the most dominant faiths in the world. And next week we will start looking at the Christian faith and how it developed. This is the legend of Narcissus, or at least one version of it.
Picked up a book that someone in the caravan had brought. Leafing through the pages, he found a story about Narcissus. The alchemist knew the legend of Narcissus, a youth who knelt daily beside a lake to contemplate his own beauty. He was so fascinated by himself that one morning he fell into the lake and drowned. At the spot where he fell, a flower was born, which was called the Narcissus. But this was not how the author of the book ended the story. He said that when Narcissus died, the goddesses of the forest appeared and found the lake, which had been fresh water, transformed into a lake of salty tears. "Why do you weep?" the goddesses asked. "I weep for Narcissus," the lake replied. "It is no surprise that you weep for Narcissus," they said, "for though we always pursued him in the forest, you alone could contemplate his beauty close at hand." "But was Narcissus beautiful?" the lake asked. "Who better than you to know that?" the goddesses asked in wonder. "After all, it was by your banks that he knelt each day to contemplate himself." The lake was silent for some time. Finally, it said, "I weep for Narcissus, but I never noticed that Narcissus was beautiful. I weep because each time he knelt beside my banks, I could see in the depths of his eyes my own beauty reflected." What a lovely story, the alchemist thought.